Hey, what's going on, good people? Welcome back to Training Well Done, your podcast on the what, the why, and the how of quality training. Here with your show host, I'm Coach Donald,
Coach Tim?
and we're here to talk about improving endurance training.
Yes.
Uh, we did our
Yes, we
last
are.
we did our last episode on strength training, and so we know a lot of our listeners are endurance athletes, or at least have been in the past. So we're assuming that you still are endurance runners. So we're gonna talk about that next. Um, Man, so kind of some thoughts just opening up, right? I just got done with half Ironman Wisconsin, 70.3 Wisconsin back.
Congratulations.
Thank you. 3 weeks ago, and I have actually, for a brief period of time, exited the endurance running train. I did not do the great race yesterday for the first time in like 4 years because I was like, my hair is looking crazy. I need a break from all like the long distance running.
I think it's healthy to take a break. I really do. Obviously not, shutting everything down completely and sitting on the couch for 2 weeks, but I think it helps establish a really healthy relationship with what it is that you're doing to step away from it for a while.
You know, it was fun when I told Patrick that I was like, he was in there working out, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm gonna like get into like sprinting and like some power stuff. And he's
Hmm.
like wearing his Iron Man bag, and he's like, yeah, I think that'll be great. Like, just having that time away to just work on his other skills, like you'll bounce back even better. And I was like, I needed to
Yeah,
hear.
yeah, it's true.
So, what we want to chat about in this episode are really getting into some of the fun. There's so much science about endurance training. Oh my goodness, there's so much. I mean, there's so much science about training in general. But even just looking at some of our deep dive questions and things that we have to like table for another time
Uh
and we're going
huh.
to pick on, like, there's so many of these things that are just episodes of podcasts. And, these episodes exist on other shows, like, so much. And there's books around some of these just topics by themselves. Like, it's really, really cool. So we really want to talk about what changes in your body with endurance training. What are these different ways you can train endurance? Like, there's actually a lot of nuance here.
Yeah, it's I think what our primary goal for at least this episode is going to be is to just like talk about what happens in your body as you improve endurance, what, why, how, that sort of thing. But like you said, coach, we were looking through the notes here and we were like this topic could easily be two or three different episodes. So
This could be the whole podcast.
it really could.
Now, you're our resident fast endurance runner. Like, tell us a bit about like what that journey's been like for improving your endurance to where like you live a life where you run as part of your commute, kind of like Alyssa. Maybe not to her extent because like
Definitely
she's
not.
wild. Shout out to you, Alyssa, who like I would just get on Strava and see like 18 miles on like a Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
19 miles on Wednesday.
If you're listening, respect.
But how did you get to that level of endurance and ability to be able to just like run for you ran here to like shoot the podcast, and I'm guessing you're running back to go back to work.
That's the plan. Yeah, I think uh, lot of people might know this, and some might not. But I, when I was a younger athlete, my focus was on basketball and baseball. And that's actually I went to Point Park for my undergrad and played basketball there. So I didn't get into running until a little bit later on in my career. I ran as a junior and a senior. Um, at Point Park. And I think one of the things that I credit my longevity in the sport to is the fact that I wasn't, so highly specialized so soon. So like I still love running. I'm not burnt out on running. Um, I give myself breaks season to season, like we just mentioned, where you step away and do something else. And it's been fun to like vary up the distances that you train and race for too. I think I have this conversation with a buddy of mine all the time is, the natural progression and, do your first 5K, then maybe do a second one, try and set a better time, then bump to the 10K and the half and the full. And then you get stuck in this cycle of like, just full marathon after full marathon. Like sometimes it's cool to take a step back and just be like, hey, I want to take this entire training cycle and run a really fast 5K. Because more isn't always better. And so I think having a good relationship with the discipline has helped sustain it over the longer term. And as a function of that, I've been able to, like you said, just work it in my day to day life, which is a lot of fun. My fastest days are probably behind me, but well, that's a conversation for another day.
I want to get to some of that. What are your fastest days? Like, tell us about some of those races, and people want to know your times. I don't know if they do, but I do. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
I
I'm
mean,
so curious.
I'll be frank. My times are not phenomenal. I mean, you're just looking at some of these winning times from the great race, the 5K and the 10K yesterday. I mean, these are athletes that are cooking. Um, I've always tried to remain age group competitive. That's
Mm,
kind of been the standard. So I like to go into every event with a time goal, of course, based on where my training is and how I'm feeling about the race. Um, Also, like an overall placement goal based on what some of the past results have been, right? Like, do I see myself in the top 20, the top 10, the top 5, whatever that might be? And then I always try and if it's in the cards and the race is not too competitive, then I do try and finish in the top 3 for my age group. So it kind of depends on the event, where I'm at with training and everything. But I would classify myself as not a top tier, Olympic caliber athlete by any means, but age group competitive is where I've landed.
nice. That's awesome. I want to get to being age group competitive.
I
I'm
think
not.
it's sustainable, right? Like as long as I remain age group competitive, I can stay that way, for the
Yeah,
next few
you
decades.
keep aging with the same people.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like a cohort.
Yeah. And it's cool to see, say, those people go through their running journeys too. And it was really cool for me yesterday at the Great Race to see, like, not just the Great Race, but earlier this year and even reaching back into last fall, like the up and comers, the new cohort,
Hmm.
the guys who are training at a high level and still have fresh legs and will be, those would be the guys getting on the podium for the next several years. And so it's cool to see, where I was, but also what's coming up behind me.
Yeah. Think about some coaching moments coming up to share. I'm really excited for Wednesday to go to Tinley's cross country meet.
Hmm.
To see her run this PR. She's like so pressed about like wanting to drop these 10 seconds off of this course time. So excited to see that. It was really cool watching like it's cross country season. So I can't wait for the also Saturday to go up to White Oak for the Bald Eagle invite to watch like a lot of these kids really drop some times. I think a lot of them are going to be there,
Yeah,
and so really seeing like, all right, let's see what the work you did over the summer, and even just stacking the years because so much of endurance training is stacking year over year, season over season, and
absolutely.
just constantly building. You go from your long cross country season to your track season. Some people go from like marathon season to like, all right, I'm gonna work on my like 10K or half marathon speed and then go back to that,
Start the
and,
cycle
and,
all
and
over
seeing
again.
that.
Yeah.
So really
Yes,
excited
sir.
to see like how that plays out for them. And it was fun, like even just a couple weeks ago watching Caroline run and how massive of an improvement that was for her at that boys course.
Yeah, it's really neat for me to see, like, you mentioned Tinley and everyone racing this week, but it's cool to see the retention and the improvement from the kids that have participated in trackside over the summer,
Mhm.
especially for the first time. Like, take that entire new tool belt into the season with them, right? Because now they're just better equipped, for a
Yeah.
successful season, and it's fun to watch that materialize.
Oh, speaking of, I mentioned Patrick E earlier, but Patrick B, he won the Youngstown invite.
Yeah,
Like, so shout out to Patrick. We're not coaching him right now. He's like a sophomore in college, but he is a dog
yes, sir.
and went out and ran a course record at the Youngstown invite, won the meet. It was just on fire. And I don't know if this is, I think the podcast is small enough to talk about this. Well, I'm going to keep the other kid's name out of it. But me and his
Mhm.
mom were texting, and she's like, the guy, there's one of these runners who a couple years ago when he was a senior, like was dominating the cross country and track circuit,
Okay.
and goes to the school that they're gonna be racing at next week. And Patrick's set on taking that kid down
Yeah.
and getting his
Yeah.
lick back from the senior year of high school.
Like I was not around when you were coaching Patrick, but I've seen the guy lay down intervals at the track, man. He's a competitor.
Yeah.
And his team backed him up, man. They had what, 24,
Oh yeah,
27
they
total
had like
points?
4 in the top 10.
Yeah, they crushed.
Yeah. So that was massive. So those are my moments.
That's cool. I enjoyed seeing our crew out at the Great Race. We had a handful of PRs. Um, I know I'm sure I'm going to leave somebody out, so I'm not even going to say the whole list because I don't want to admit anyone. But I believe everyone that's currently training with us who raced one of the Great Race events did set a PR. But what was cool for me, and I was thinking about this on my run out there, and then after the fact, a little bit later on in the day, is like it's it's so neat. I think that event is such an iconic running event for the
Mm.
city of Pittsburgh in a way that not a lot of the other events are. I mean, it's one of the longest standing races, obviously. I think they're coming up on 50 years. I should know that off the top of my head, but I think it's close. You've got the streakers, the people who have run it every year since its inception. And I mean, just the course itself, the Boulevard of the Allies is shut down, and you're running up there, in first thing in the morning. You get the view of the river. But um, what was really neat for me, and this is going to tie back into what we were saying about making running just part of your overall lifestyle in general, is because of the way that the course is laid out and it's point to point, um, and it's pretty much a straight shot. Um, you've got people that will do one event. You'll have people that will do both. You will have people that will come out and spectate. Um, and a lot of them live relatively close to the course because of how it's laid out. So, um, when I say it's such an iconic running event, it's because I feel as if during the morning of the Great Race, runners take over Pittsburgh in a way that they don't even during marathon weekend. Because marathon weekend is very scripted, right? Um, and the court, obviously we're dealing with massive numbers of people, and the course is well contained. During the Great Race, you've got runners going in every different direction all over town. Sometimes it's as part of the race. Sometimes it's to get to the start line of the race. Sometimes it's to run the race and go back to the start line of the other race. And so there's just all this like crisscrossing and dodging and weaving. And there's runners everywhere, whether or not they're participating in the race. And so it's really cool. And for us, it was cool to be, at the cheer station that we had, where it was only a handful of us because everybody else was participating in the race,
There
right?
was
So
a lot of people in the
I
race.
think my moment was not like one individual athlete, but more of the fact like that I couldn't recruit people for the cheer station because they were all too busy competing.
Yeah. I have another shout out actually from the Great Race. Tom. Oh my gosh. So Tom and Mary, they went out and did it. Mary just did that sprint triathlon. She was the oldest person at the sprint triathlon. Shout
Yep.
out to Tom. I don't think he was the oldest person in the 10K, but like he was up there, and like he crushed it. Like that
Yeah.
was so cool. Like they finished and left before I could find them, and I like called Mary like, wait, where y'all at? Oh, we're on the bus. I was like, oh, I had to look up the results. Like, oh man, we've been finished.
They're done and out of
They're
here.
done.
Good
So
for them.
that's really cool. Yeah, that was awesome. So, what I want to talk about next, let's talk about some of you endurance runners and some of these common misconceptions. We talked about some of this in the last episode, lifting
We
being
did.
useless. We're gonna say just listen to the last episode, but lifting keeps you healthy. But that's a common assumption.
Yeah, it's one of the ones obviously that it's on the top of the list for a reason,
Yeah.
right? We hear it all the time. We unpacked it a lot during the course of the first episode, so definitely if you haven't listened to that, go ahead check it out.
We in part have a business that works because it is an assumption and a misconception. If it wasn't, we might train different people. The other thing I find is two sides of a coin. Some people that swear only doing LSD training, long, slow distance training, is like the only thing that they'll ever do and they should do. And then other people who are only going to run fast all of the time. And how that's also not as helpful. You can get away with some of the stuff when you're new, but for a while, can't.
Yeah, we see it a lot with some of the first time runners, or maybe the more just generally inexperienced runners, just running at the same pace for all of their runs. Whether that's a nice slow easy pace to keep it relaxed and conversational, or they're doing all of their miles at their goal race pace to
Yeah.
really lock that in. Um, you need the variation, for
I
sure.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that, like, speaking for people who were like moderately athletic in like high school or college, because this definitely will not apply to a lot of people. I think there's a rite of passage of going out and running an 8-minute mile for every single run. I think like it's a rite of passage for like, if you played like basketball in high school or college or football or you ran track and you're getting into running and you're like kind of fast already. You're somebody who might be able to run like a 7-minute mile, or even like an 8-minute mile.
Hmm.
Going out, okay, I'll widen this out a little bit. I'm not gonna widen this out too much because I want to be narrow about this hot take. But running an 8 or 9-minute mile for all 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 miles of your run 2, 3, 4 days a week, I think is almost a rite of passage to getting into running. Not to like gatekeep or have rites of passage. This is kind of a jokey hot take, but like I find that so many people like at run clubs, or especially like 20 somethings or like people in their early 30s who get into running and they're kind of fast. Like I'm just gonna run that kind of fast the whole time because it's a type of speed where you get a burn. You're not running all out, but you get a burn and you're
Hmm.
really sore after in a way that, like, if you're already capable of that, running like a 10-minute mile doesn't always do.
Right, right. And you want, if you're going for your workout, you want it to feel like a workout,
Yeah.
right? So I can understand why people do want that, the dopamine hit and the sweat and the okay, that took something out of me. I get that.
Yeah. I I want to acknowledge right now. I was about 28 or 27 or something
Okay.
when I first discovered what it means for like a limb to fall asleep. Like I've had the sensation happen to me when I was a kid and even in high school. But I didn't know that that's what people meant when something fell asleep. It was just that annoying tingly feeling. And then one day I was just talking to somebody and it happened and I was like, it was like my leg asleep. Oh, that's what people
Oh,
mean. And like I literally had that kind of
wow.
moment. Like I didn't know what that meant my whole life until like a few years ago.
Wow.
My leg
That's
just fell
cool.
asleep massively because I had it crossed in a way that I probably should have stretched more. And like I was starting to hurt now. And like my leg was asleep and I put it on the ground and I couldn't feel it anymore. And I was like, is this what it's like to not be able to feel your
That's
like limb? Like I knew my leg was on the ground, I couldn't feel
what a
it. And now
mind-blowing
it's waking up
experience.
and it hurts so bad. Oh man, yeah. Um Late discoveries in life. Some other things. There's a lot of nuance about more is better. More miles, more miles, more miles, more miles, more miles. More miles often helps, but there's a lot of nuance there, and eventually, more miles hurts.
Yeah. If if you want to get better at something, you got to do more of the thing, right? Um, Again, I would definitely recommend listening to or watching the first episode because we do touch on that a little bit and how you're able to handle more of the thing. But there is so much nuance in there, whereas like more isn't always better, but better is better. So maybe fewer miles with better quality, right, and more or better recovery are going to yield better adaptations than just grinding over and over and over.
Yeah. So let's dive into some of these, our deep dive segment where we get into some of the science, because that's the fun part of this. And as we said in the other episode, I'm gonna say this for a while. Please make suggestions on topics, specific stuff that you want to like really learn some nerdy stuff about. I want to get nerdy into the show.
Hmm.
We got to cover some bases here, and figure out what do you want to learn. But what we're gonna start off with is what actually changes when you start running. Now, I want to make it clear that this episode is meant to be able to cover endurance in general. So, like if you're doing a lot of biking, if you're doing a lot of walking, to some extent, this applies. If you're doing a lot of swimmings, may apply. If you're already a good swimmer, this applies. If you are not a decent swimmer, I want to say decent, but if you can't swim for a long time already, then some of these things may not apply to that. But like if you're able to like swim continuously and swim as part of like really your fitness training, then a lot of these things also still apply to that. No expert on swimming, I just learned, but as
Mm.
like a coach, it's allowed me to like self learn how to swim, as well as be able to take some good advice. So, anyways, when you are doing endurance training, you have some fundamentally different adaptations that happen versus when you're strength training. One, your heart gets stronger. So your heart is a big muscle. Like literally, like think about your bicep. Your heart's a big muscle, right? It's a smooth muscle. It's a different type of muscle.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain muscles in your body that are voluntary, like your arms and your legs, and you have involuntary muscles. So like the digestion, like your heart. So there's a lot of muscles that you are not in control of for your benefit. And so as you run, your heart gets a lot stronger. What that means, it's able to, every time it beats, squish more blood through your body. All right, so there's four corners of your heart. We're gonna just say the top squeezes and the bottom squeezes. When the top squeezes, the blood goes to your lungs to get the CO2 out of the blood and to put the oxygen into the blood. And then the blood pours back into the heart. And then when the bottom squeezes, that means that, oh, I got that mixed up. I'm so sorry. When the top squeezes, the blood goes into the ventricle. I'm so sorry. When the top squeezes, the blood goes back into the ventricles. Um, when the bottom squeezes, some of the blood goes into the lungs, and the other blood goes throughout your body. Oh gosh, please no one clip that. As your heart gets stronger, you might notice that with people that are very fit, your heart rate drops, your resting heart rate drops. And even at any given interval of work, your heart rate will drop because your body
Mm-hmm.
is better at squishing more blood per heart rate beat. So it doesn't need to beat as fast. If you can get way more blood circulation through there, it can improve. There's important metrics like cardiac output and stroke volume that are based on time lengths and volume of how much blood you can get around the body. And so these are important metrics that will improve. Other things that change, you get more blood vessels.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your veins. These are what you can see right through here. So if you're looking on the video, you can see all these veins in my arm. Veins transport blood back to the heart. And you have arteries, which you usually cannot see arteries. They're a little bit deeper in, and they're just not as visible. But arteries transport blood from your heart to all of your organs. And just like going from highways to alleys, arteries get thinner as you go, and there are arterioles and things like that, to where you get to the point where you get the capillaries. And capillaries are microscopic. And capillaries are much thinner. There's less wall structure. The endothelium is a lot more passable for nutrients and all this stuff. You can get into that, but you get more capillaries. And so the more capillaries you have, the more nutrients you can deliver to the muscles. So if you think about having a town with one main road through it
Mm-hmm.
and all the trucks have to drive through there, you're only going to be able to deliver so many packages. But now if the town is more sprawling, you have more roads, the roads are bigger, you're able to get more trucks into there so that you can deliver more oxygen. If you can deliver more oxygen, you can stay in an aerobic capacity state for a lot longer. I didn't even put this. Sorry. To talk about. So there's a whole lot about metabolism on there. And then the other part that changes with endurance training is you get more mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get more of these mitochondria that build up throughout your muscles, and that allows you to take the sugar that is used in energy, and you're able to use it much more efficiently. So every gram of sugar, you're going to be able to get a lot more energy out of it because you're going to be able to use more oxygen to mix it and make your metabolism happen. So these are some of the big things that happen. Your heart gets stronger, you get more capillaries, and you have more mitochondria.
Yeah, and those are the big three, right? Because when you think about it, endurance training, because it's a lower intensity, typically a lower intensity, higher volume, aerobic activity, the main focus is getting oxygen and nutrients to working muscles, right? So how do we do that? We make sure that the heart is getting um, or the heart is able to push the blood throughout the system quickly and effectively, that it's able to reach its targeted areas of delivery, right, through the increased capillary density, and that also that you get the proper nutrients to fuel for these longer duration events through that mitochondria.
Yeah. And some other things that also happen with that, muscular endurance. So we could talk more about this in more of a strength training segment, but as you train, your actual muscle fibers improve their endurance capacities. Now, people who are doing a lot of endurance training or have a kind of genetic preference to liking to do that and are being successful at it, you have a lot of type 1 fibers, but even some of your type 2 fibers or type 2A fibers,
Mm-hmm.
those actually improve their oxidative capacity. All the mitochondria, that's where they end up at, is in those muscle fibers. And so the actual muscles that you use, they improve their endurance. Fun fact, even when you do strength training and when a lot of people do power training, you have a increased oxidative capacity in your type 2A fibers. Your type 2X fibers, well, those are really explosive, really powerful, and they're not going to get any more endurance. But a lot of people, and you might notice this, that at the very first time you do something really explosively, you're not able to replicate it maybe next week when you start training, because some of those type 2X fibers turn to type 2A fibers. So they lost a little bit of those, that power, but they have a little bit more fatigue resistance. And then as you keep training, you're able to regain that power back. But that's a thing that happens sometimes. It's also, I think, I need to read this again, so please don't overly quote me on this, but I'm pretty confident that part of tapering outside of the rest, I guess this is for power sports, this really doesn't matter for people that run marathons, is a rebounding of some of that through like the less training
Yeah,
stress
that
that
makes
can go
that
on
make that
to get
makes
some of those
sense.
type 2 X fibers back. But
I
that's a track thing.
I wonder though, now that we bring this up, I wonder if that's an idea for a future podcast, is to really take a deep dive into like muscle fiber type
Oh,
and
that would be
training and
so fun.
recovery for all of, yeah.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be so fun.
I feel like that might answer a lot of like listener and viewer questions. You might want to take it to another level.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So we talked about our big three. So our heart getting stronger, getting more blood vessels, and having more mitochondria increase. Now, there are some nuance about how we spend our time training. Because if you do a lot of just, easy runs, and we're gonna I guess we should back up. Because I already led this off with a lot of people's rite of passage being that they run at like basically zone 3 the whole time. And so I guess we should talk about the zones. So do you want to talk about these different zones that people think about running at all the time?
I would love to. Thank you. Um, yeah. I'm gonna operate under the assumption here that most of the people that are listening or watching this are familiar with a heart rate zone or a heart rate training zone, and you're probably familiar with the 5 zone model, right? At least that's what your fitness tracker is gonna be giving you with all those nice colors there. There are a lot of different there there are a few popular heart rate zone training models that are not all 5 zone based, and the reason for that is because um the stimulus that you're introducing to your system through endurance training as you move through those zones is not so clearly defined as we would like to think it is, right? As human beings, we want to categorize everything and put it in its nice little bucket. And you know, when we're running, when we're walking, we're in zone 1 and it's active recovery and it's doing X, Y, and Z. And then when we move to zone 2, it's more, aerobic based, and it's helping with all these things that we just talked about. And then you go to zone 3 and 4 and 5 and so on and so forth. The boundaries between the zones, there's a gray area there with the type of physiological adaptation that you are going to trigger by staying in that state. So the 5 zones is a good way to think about it. Um, you can think in terms of 3 zones like jogging, running, sprinting, and then when you get to your higher intensities, with like your short, fast stuff, then you can even break that down even further, right? Because um, your 200 on, 200 off is going to look a lot different than if you were doing 400, intervals with full recovery,
What's that breakdown look
right?
like?
The
Like I guess
break,
like when people think about that intense training model, like I guess what does that look like?
yeah. So the in my experience, the people sort of have a tendency to um, pigeonhole themselves into what they think that their interval pace should be, right? So no matter the distance of their intervals, they're going to have a tendency to perform them all at roughly the same pace. Like, say you're doing your mile repeats at about a 6 minute pace, then they're gonna break that down and say, okay, I need to do my if we do a 400 workout, we need to do those at 90 seconds piece. And you you see this with a lot of gen pop athletes or people kind of new to the sport, who haven't spent a lot of time in those higher intensity zones, think like there's a ceiling and like that's my ceiling, that's all there is to it. um, it's only with your more experienced athletes when you can start to understand the nuance and like, okay, is my ceiling really my ceiling? And what happens when I push past my ceiling, right? Because when you do, then you raise the ceiling,
Mm.
as opposed to just develop your ability to maintain your existing ceiling over a longer duration of time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if I'm hearing that right, there's certain things that help you like really push your boundaries of what you're capable of, and certain types of training that help you kind of stay where you're at. But sometimes when people think about doing higher intensity work, they actually just they think of that as one intensity and not multiple intensities.
That's correct. Yes, and that's why when we talk about this zone model, um, or this prevailing 5 zone model, that it's just important. It's a great baseline, to start with, but it's important to understand that there are gray areas between the zones where your the stimuli, maybe some of blue zone, some of green zone sort of situation, and it's not just this magical threshold or barrier that you cross, and then all of a sudden you're working different systems in a
Mm.
different way, right? There's a lot of interplay there, um, and that these zones themselves can also be broken down, when you're starting to talk about the higher end and the higher intensities. They can be broken down in a little bit more detail. So, um, all that to say is that to answer your question about heart rate zones and using them as a training tool, is it's a great place to start. Um, but it's also not the end all be all. And you have to have the right mix and the right variation, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, of how much time you spend at or around these different zones, and what that does to your endurance training as a whole.
So some things that there's a lot of nuance in ways to break things down. I think a lot of people from a lot of people may grow to be familiar with easy running versus hard running. And so, for those of you listening, as you progress in your running career, you are likely going to find that there's different paces to run at for different goals that suit if you're training for something. And it's one thing if you're just running for fitness, and I think if you're running for fitness and you're running like 2 or 3 days a week, you more or less can do whatever you want. I think until you get to the point where you're trying
Mhm.
to train for a time goal, then things can start changing a lot more. We're going to talk about more the aspect of training for a time goal versus running because it's just you want to keep your heart healthy. Which no matter what you do running wise, you're going to keep your heart healthy. So there's easy running, and there's different ways to break that down. You have your like base miles that are just working on improving your endurance. So that is that base part of improving your heart strength, improving your
Hmm.
capillary density, and also as a good idea of working on your form for running. I think that sometimes gets understated. There's
I agree.
recovery
Yeah.
runs, which is, a much usually a slower pace that for your recovery where you're just running to, be able to get some blood flow through those muscles and those joints, being able to still work on going over the pattern, but being able to get your body recovered through there, which I think there's a lot of room to do other things in recovery, but it's how some people handle that. Um, there was something else I was thinking of in the easy category. You could start getting into then your speed work. And so as we look at kind of this faster end, there's like the slower runs, which, some people might consider marathon pace, like easier running if you're really, really well recovered
Hmm.
versus if you're like actually really in a training block. There's getting into VO2 max training, there's getting into lactic threshold training.
Hmm.
Um, there's looking at race specific pacing just to work on understanding that pace. You want to break some of that down?
I feel like you might have raised more questions here that I can answer in the next hour, but um, it's a lot of times the answers are going to be so athlete specific, right? Because some people may be performing their goal race distance um, at lactate threshold levels, right? Whereas others are more are going to cover the distance at more of like a tempo pace. And what's the definition of tempo? You
Oh my
ask
God, what is the definition of
10
tempo?
different people, you're going to get 10 different answers, right? And so uh, the VO2 max is obviously a little bit more clearly identified, right? Um, but that's where the conversation then sort of shifts into more of an RPE based model because the workouts in your training plan are designed to elicit a specific stimulus, right? And if we get so hung up on just zones or just paces and forget about how things feel subjectively in the moment, um, that's when you might not be pushing hard enough to get the appropriate stimulus and getting better, or pushing too hard and pushing yourself towards like overtraining or
Mm.
needing the extra recovery, right? And so different coaches will um, it's starting to become a little bit more standardized now. I'm sure you would agree in what the definition of some of these terms is. You know, tempo versus threshold, critical velocity, even VO2 max,
Mm.
like all of this sort of stuff. But there is some sort of ambiguity with the definitions themselves. So it's a little hard to say, hey, listen, this is a one size fits all training program that's like guaranteed to make you a stronger, faster, fitter athlete, um, because different things work for different people, which we talked a little bit about last time with the injury prevention and risk mitigation, um, but also in terms of like what those things um, actually mean for that individual athlete as a derivative of their expected, or let's say their ultimate training goal.
Yeah.
Ultimate training goal being race distance at X pace on, Y day.
Yeah. So some things to think about, while you mentioned a lot of different terms, to just get some of you started with, being able to do some research on this. And these are things that I think we can make even full episodes about what they look like. There's VO2 max. So VO2 max is the volume of oxygen that your body can actually utilize. So just because you breathe doesn't mean you actually can use all the oxygen. Surprise, surprise. And so the better trained your aerobic system is, then the more oxygen you can actually use to perform.
Hmm.
We talked about those mitochondria. And so the more mitochondria you have, those help utilize the oxygen. There's this thing called electron transport chain. And, as you go through the Krebs cycle, you take your sugar or you take your fat that your body re-breaks down into sugar. You take your protein because you haven't been eating enough. And then it takes that and breaks it down into sugar. And it runs it through the Krebs cycle. You get all these little ATPs. Oh my gosh, ATPs is a whole other thing. And so You take the remaining pyruvate, you take this to this mitochondria, to this electron transport chain, and it uses oxygen in a way that I can explain another time. And you make a lot of energy out of it. And so the more mitochondria you have, and the better you improve your body's systematic use of oxygen, then the more you can get for all of the food that you actually have available as energy. You have this other thing called lactic threshold. The last time you went for a really hard run, maybe you did the Great Race. I mean, by the time this gets released, the Great Race will have been some time ago. But in the last race you ran, or last time you did a hard workout, that burning in your legs, um, I that's not lactic acid. Okay, we're gonna go there. But that is the feeling of the acidity that builds up. Now, fun. So lactate. What is lactate? Lactate is sugar. When you drink milk, you are drinking lactate. All right. Your body makes lactate as a metabolite from just existence, especially when you are living a higher intensity existence, like
Mm,
running or swimming hard. If you're swimming a really hard, half mile, you're going to feel this lactate, this burn from the acidity that happens with lactate. Now, why am I dancing around those words? People are going to talk about lactic acid. The human body does not generate lactic acid inside. The germs on your skin can make lactic acid from eating the oils and random things on your skin, and that can smell. But that's why you should take showers. But the human body doesn't make lactic acid. Instead, you make lactate as a way of going through the Krebs cycle in your metabolism, and you have a rise in acidity that happens in a 1-to-1 ratio, but they're not the same molecule. Like HLA is not in your body. You have a rise in hydrogen ions that's in your body. And as you develop more, like the way they tell that by taking a blood draw of
hmm
lactate, and you can then tell how acidic the actual muscle fiber is getting from the actual training that you're doing. Anyways, so lactic threshold is how much lactic and acid your body can handle because it's buffering it. Like your body takes baking soda and basically sprinkles it in your muscles, and that helps keep the burn down. And you can usually run at this lactic threshold for about an hour. So if you're trying to figure this out, it's about how fast you can run for an hour. Whereas your VO2 max is around how fast you can run for, what is it, about like 10 to 15 minutes or so? I need to double check that, but it's around a lot of people's 2 mile to 3 mile pace, is where that VO2 max threshold is, and that's going to vary based on your experience,
of
how
course,
fast you
right,
are, and things like that. But
right.
this lactic threshold, you hear people talk about threshold training. It's about improving your abilities body to buffer this out. And so the more you expose yourself to this type of training, then the better your body can get at buffering out the acid, which means you can handle higher levels of blood lactate, because you can handle higher levels of acidity, so that you can train through harder paces, which aka means you can run at faster paces in your races.
Yes, I'm glad that you provided that distinction, especially between lactic acid and lactate. Why you would train at your lactate threshold, um, and specifically VO2 max, right? Because um, for a handful of athletes, they're going to be racing a 5K at VO2 max. Out of 100, let's say out of 10 athletes, how many of them would you advise to run their 5K at VO2 max, right?
Yeah. Oh, wait.
I mean, so I guess we work with a little bit different populations here too, because you're working with the kids in cross country season, um, but the the idea being is that the more experienced an athlete is, the more time that they've spent at these higher intensity um, output levels, the better able they are to handle that, and then that will translate over race day. Whereas someone who is maybe not so experienced and just starting to build their overall endurance and is treating a 5K as their you know first race event, we're going to say, okay, yeah, you're running hard, but you might be closer to running at your lactate threshold as opposed to your VO2 max, right?
Hmm.
And so the devil's in the details when
Yes.
it comes to the training and the racing. And a lot of it just comes down to experience, and also having good coaches, right, who can kind of advise you along how you approach any given training session or event.
Yeah. So some big takeaways for you all is thinking about how many different ways you mentioned how you can measure intensity. You mentioned like the RP model. There's
Mm-hmm.
these 5 heart rate zone. There's some other ways that people do it. I know people that swear they don't look at heart rate at all because these little Garmins can be like chains sometimes to people and like
Mm-hmm.
oh my god, I went from my heart rate being at 148 to 140
Yeah.
now, and now I'm like ruining my
It's a
workout.
tool, not a crutch.
Yeah. And honestly, based on your recovery at any given moment, your heart rate is going to change for the workout, which is also why being able to, that's why I said it's a rite of passage to run fast all the time. Cause then you like, oh, I want to like train for something. And then you get hurt or you get burned out, like not burned out, but you kind of overtrain a little bit and then you're not able to actually perform the way you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize, oh, I need to run slow sometimes because when you train at especially VO2 max type of training and getting in a threshold training, your body needs time to
Yeah,
recover.
that's hard.
All that metabolite that builds up is part of the soreness you get from running. And so your body is, to an extent, has a cold and it's trying to clear that out. Also, we didn't really talk about the nervous system very much, but your nervous system, like fast running, is very stimulating from all those nervous system signals you have to constantly keep sending. You might have brain fog the next day. You might be really
Mm-hmm.
tired. You need to recover from that as well. And so you find that there's a dance that you have to have with how much of that training you can handle before you have to recover. How much can you do before you need to get better? If you're new and you're trying to run your first 10K and you're only running like 20 miles a week, you don't need to do more than probably like a day or so of any of this type of really intense running versus somebody who's very elite. They might fit 2, maybe even 3 of these sessions throughout the week. I read something just the other day about people are doing like double threshold days and do a threshold run in the morning and another one in the evening so that they can get a double in that day so that they can use
Oh
the next
man.
couple of days of recovery to
Uh-huh.
do more volume.
Uh-huh.
And so there's this big end of the spectrum, but you have to have a lot of capacity and a lot of need for that. You don't want to train more intense than you actually need to train for whatever you're training for.
Yeah, I think one of the easiest ways to simplify it, and the double thresholds in and of themselves could probably be a whole other episode. Um, so my biggest takeaway from this episode is that we need 5 more. But one of the simplest, most convenient, succinct ways that I put this for people, no matter what their level of experience, if they're looking to develop endurance, they need to, let's say, train in all of the quote unquote zones. The distribution is going to be different for different people, right? Not all of your runs are going to be hard or all of your runs are going to be easy, but you need the buffet. Everybody does, no matter who they are. And that your primary focus should be on density or frequency first, volume comes second, and then intensity comes
I
third,
love that. Yes, yes, I
right?
totally agree. Reminds me and Dan actually did a podcast and we talked about that. Yes. Improve how many days you can run first,
Mm-hmm.
how often you can run, and really be able to just build that. Even if you're a beginner, even if it's just 2 miles,
Absolutely.
a day, can you build up how many days you can run 2 miles before you start trying to run further on each of those days? Before we even start talking about paces and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
absolutely. You gotta start with the bare bones, right? Um, frequency first.
Some other things you can think about as it looks like, especially if you're kind of a beginner and you're thinking about pacing, there's a pace you can talk at. There's a pace you can kind of talk at, but you don't really want to. And there's a pace that you cannot talk at. You cannot say more than a couple of words at a time. And so being able to, like, those tie up pretty well with different intensities. If you can't talk more than a couple of words, you're probably running really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can talk, but you don't really want to, like, that's like more of a moderate pace. And if you're able to record a podcast while you run, like I've recorded like videos while I was running, like you can, that's more of an easier pace. Some things to think about are also surface. right? So if you're looking at, I know this is more like running specific, but how does your body handle endurance on a trail surface versus a road surface? There's a lot of people that can run a lot longer and a lot further because they're on a trail. It's a lot softer. Most ultras are on a trail. I think in part for this reason, and I think also in part this ultras like the scenery, but
Sure.
versus road pounding, people are like, oh, it's bad for my knees. Go run in the trail. Things to also look at is you mentioned hitting these different paces. So, there's a lot of people talk about this 80-20 rule. So, making a significant portion of your running easy miles and then being able to have, one, maybe two, depending on your level of advancement, like really, we call them quality sessions where you're running fast throughout the course of your training week. And then that good old don't add too many miles as you go up. While there's a lot of nuance to how many miles people
Hmm.
should have, and where you can start at with training. Like when I did the Virginia Marathon, I was like, I'm immediately starting at 30 miles a week. And then I'm going up from there. But then I only added, one, maybe 2 miles a week for the most part until I got up to my, I think 44 mile peak week. But, some people might add 2 or 3 miles every week, or you might at 2 or 3 miles every like 2 weeks. So being able to experiment and kind of figure out what works for
Yeah.
your body.
Two thoughts before we sign off here. One, you touched on it, speed quality and speed endurance. Well, that's another topic we can table. And also, this brings it full circle when you talk about base mileage. Is we're not just when we say density and frequency, we're not just talking about week over week, but we're talking about month over month, year over year, training cycle to training cycle. And so, you mentioned it earlier, you're just layering, right? And so getting time on your feet is all good time on your feet, whether you're running hard, whether you're doing your goal race pace for a training session, or whether you're just walking for recovery.
Yeah. So thanks y'all for listening. I think this gave us a lot of great ideas
It did.
for what we can talk about more specifically. We really want this podcast to like kind of get into some of the nerdy science of some of these things, which is, why we have these excerpts about, mitochondrial density and like what happens even with like the whole lactic thing and being able to have a lot more of that. So if you have topics that you specifically want us to cover that we kind of touched on in the podcast, please, leave us a comment, send us an email, leave us a DM where you're like, hey, can you talk more about what was critical? What did you call it?
Critical velocity.
Critical velocity. Like, what is that? And so, we want to be able to bring some research to the table. My whole entire graduate school was about PGC1 alpha. And I'm just going to walk away talking about PGC1 alpha because I paid a lot of money to learn about that. And I stressed a lot about learning it. When you do interval training or any sort of like any of this high intensity work, if you go to max training or threshold training, right, you have a gene that gets expressed called PGC1 alpha. PGC1 alpha has a half life of 48 hours. And half life in science means that this is in this time frame, half of whatever this is goes away. And then it keeps having from there. And so that's when you people talk about like nuclear waste, which I do
Hmm.
love nuclear energy, but that's a whole nother thing. But I think it's really cool and I think it's really helpful. You can keep it safe. But anyways, so when you have nuclear stuff though, when they talk about it has a half life of like some of these plastics and things like that,
Yeah,
it has a half
yeah.
life of like eighteen
That's
thousand
where my
years.
brain went, was
That
the
means that like
plastics.
over 18,000 years before like half of this plastic degrades. I don't know if that's actually a number, but like I know it can be 4 or 5 figures for some of this stuff. So, anyways, um, PGC1 alpha has a half life of about 2 days before it starts to go down, which speaks to some of the needing to stack some of those endurance pieces. But what it does is then it leads to mitochondrial biogenesis, which means that this is going to be what helps create mitochondria. I would love to just make a whole episode on that so I can make sure that my graduate degree was worth it. I wrote a meta analysis on strength training for endurance athletes in grad school. Hence why GHP is clearly a thing.
Yeah.
I
You
don't think
you have
sometimes,
it still?
I
Yeah,
have it as a piece of paper and I have it saved on my computer. DM me and I can send it, I can email it to you. But I had to
that'd be neat.
collate a bunch of like research papers to talk about strength training for endurance runners. And our endurance athletes, I think I covered cycling and running
Hmm.
for that paper. Um, wow, yeah. There's so many weird things that make me think about like how GHP became a thing well before it was a thing. Um, this whole aspect of training runners, doing strength training, being able to bridge running and strength and conditioning together so that, people can have a really top tier experience. And if you want to be able to learn more about how to do strength training for yourself, our webinar is available for you. This podcast is sponsored by, guess
The
what? Global Human Performance, right? And the
webinar.
webinar. So if you want to support the podcast, go buy the webinar for yourself or for, a friend, a coach, a parent. It covers the basis of how to do strength training, from how to actually do the main exercises. Your squats, your hinges, lunges, SLDLs, your upper body pushing, your upper body pulling, your core work, as well as how to actually write workouts. A lot of places are like, oh yeah, do these squats. How
Mhm.
many should I do? How fast should I do them? How many rounds should I do? And so we break this down in the webinar for you so that you can look at the whiteboard and say, oh, all right, if I do sets of 20, it's different than doing sets of 5. And based on your training goals, you can do these sets. And if you're watching the webinar, you probably should be on the higher end of that. But watch the webinar. So we also have some cool ebooks on our website, so you can go to the website, www.ghperformance.com. We have some free resources there. And of course, follow us on Instagram at Training Well Done, at Global Human Performance, Coach Tim, Coach Donald. So hope you learned something new. And if you want to learn more about some of these things that we touched on, let us know so we can dive deep.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks, y'all.